to Simpler. We are three pastors, husbands, and fathers on a journey to make life simpler by holding Jesus as the core for every belief and practice. This journey has shaped us to be more like Christ, freed us from the shame of failure, and encouraged us to a deeper love of our Lord and God. We invite you to join us in the discussions that have shaped and continue to shape our lives.
I was like, that's pretty good.
It's just funny because, like, I remember when Asher was playing tennis a couple of months ago at the end of the school year, they would announce over the speakers what court to go to. There were like 8 courts, and they would call the names and tell them what court to go to. And they're calling every player, every single one, by their last name. Mm-hmm. And they get to Asher, and they're like, and Asher, you know, like they didn't even try to. They're like, and Asher, you're on court 3. And
so funny.
And so even at his awards ceremony, the last week of school, the guy who's reading the names, and he is reading every name first and last, and he gets to Asher, and he goes, Asher, the Elish, you know, like there's this long pause. You know,
I think it's funny when people tell you how you're supposed to pronounce your last name.
Yeah.
And it's different maybe like if you're country of origin,
right?
You know what I mean? If I go to the Philippines and they're like, well, here's how you pronounce it. It's just funny to me that like in West Texas, people are like, we got to roll all the R's.
That's happened to me. Well, not. I wasn't Pierce.
Like, how do you do that?
We had a substitute one time doing roll, and he goes, Pierce Lave. Is Pierce Lave here? And I was like, it's just love, man. You're fine. You don't have to try that
I was
hard.
trying to make it like French or something.
I guess so, man.
I don't
It
know
was
how
super
appropriate
weird.
it is because it's been a long time since I've watched it. But have you watched the Peel, the sketch where he's the substitute teacher?
Hey,
Yes,
Ron.
yeah.
And he calls all their names, or like he just butchers all their names.
It's so funny. I love it.
Oh,
Hey, let's go. Let's step on over to the PCC, my friends. Come on. Let's go to the corner. Let's do it. We're here. Pierce's Culture Corner.
I appreciate that you're changing the corner. You know, you used to go to the corner when you're in trouble, and now we're going to the corner to be educated.
To learn. Yeah, I don't know about this, but so a couple months back, here we go.
Sponsor.
A couple months back. Yeah, all right. We had Easter, and I know this is late compared to that, but there were, I guess it's almost 3 months now, but we had a lot of people. I saw a few people on Twitter sharing like medieval pictures of Christ or medieval pictures of the actual photographs, actual Polaroids, medieval paintings of Christ or medieval paintings of the crucifixion, and there are more than I had anticipated. I shouldn't necessarily say a lot, but more than I had thought of just the wound in Jesus's side, and
whole paintings of just
the wound. Yeah, I'll find I don't think I have it on here, but I have it on my phone. I'll show you the picture later. It's like the entire painting is just the wound, and then there's like other thing. I don't know if they like painted mini stories like around it. There's other details around it, but it has a
name in art history. Where they do a main picture in the middle, and then a whole bunch of like little vignettes.
I think that's what it was. Yeah, and
I forget what that's called.
And the ongoing joke with those that they were sharing was that it looks like a woman's hoo-ha. To keep it clean. And I saw that joke over and over. I shouldn't say over and over. It sounds about the painting. Like, I saw a few people, I'll say it that way, like enough for it to be repetitive in my feed, of people making those jokes about these paintings. And I was like, that's really interesting. But then I began to see some things that were actually comparing it to the real thing. So I saw one that was like
the wound of Jesus to an actual hoo-ha.
Yes, yeah. So there was one that said, I don't have the actual tweet quoted on here. I should have saved the picture to my iPad, but it said, let's also on this day not forget where blood, water, and new life also flow from. And it was like a sculpture that looked more like the anatomy than the wound, but was trying to point at that. And it was like trying to make the connection between the wound of Christ to where water, blood, and new life flow from in regards to a woman, and was trying to push that to a higher standpoint, or make that illusion is probably the better way of saying it. And then I had seen, within weeks of that, I had seen another picture be shared of a a woman breastfeeding, and she's saying to her child as she's breastfeeding, "This is my body broken for you. Take and eat."
Oh, wow.
And I just don't know there's something to be there's something to be said that's be proud about motherhood. Like if you want, like acknowledge the servanthood, the pain, the suffering that goes into that goes into bringing new life. But what I don't understand the need to,
if you connect it to, I mean, if we were being honest, to connect it to Jesus is a proclamation of themselves as God.
Absolutely. And
there's no other way to get around that.
There's no other way to get around it.
Yeah.
And I don't think the people sharing it, I'll say this, I don't know who created these things. They're obviously on Twitter, it's their own Twitter feed, but like the actual memes themselves, the one that said, for those watching, create it.
Yeah, you have your invisible phone in your hand.
Yeah,
you're showing
they're creating it. Yeah. But the breastfeeding picture was actually like someone had to paint that and construct that, and they had the words on there as like a dialogue box, and someone shared that painting. So I think the people sharing it, like they're just seeing an immediate connection of like, oh, Christ said that, and that's something that goes into motherhood. So that's a beautiful connection. Instead of thinking even one step ahead, where it is
like Christ is our mother.
I know, which that's a whole nother sect as well. Like that's actually a cool. Oh no, that's God is the mother, right?
Yeah.
That's a whole nother thing. But like, on the surface, you're just flying through social media and you're thinking, oh, that's pretty, and I'm a mom, share. Like, but there's then it gets to people like me who have a podcast, and I'm going to talk about it because if you think one step ahead, it's exactly what you said, Micah. It's a proclamation. Like they are proclaiming themselves in that moment to be the sacrifice of the world, as Jesus was a sacrifice for us. Like they're equating themselves to what Jesus did in his language there. What he's doing in that moment is he's proclaiming himself to be the Passover lamb. He's proclaiming the cross to be sufficient. He's proclaiming what he's going to do to be sufficient for the sins of the world. And then what sucks is people I think see that a lot of times and make that connection to something like motherhood, and they see that as elevating what Jesus said, where in all actuality, you're diminishing it and you're watering it down, instead of saying like Christ is the only one who could have done these things. Now you're saying, no, all women have done these things. All women's bodies have been broken, or mothers, I should say.
When he's talking to Nicodemus and he says you got to be born again, and Nicodemus, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
And he's like, wait, how do I get back in my mother's womb? He's like, no, you've missed it. It's not just that. It's you got to be born of the Spirit as well. So like even Jesus acknowledges that the new life we have in him isn't being born from a hee-haw. What'd you say?
Hoo-ha? How did I say? Yeah.
I don't know how you said it. It's a whole different...
Hee-haw?
So it's a totally different concept. There's no way to get around this. Is a proclamation. This is like a proclamation of yourself as God.
Absolutely. Yeah. And my encouragement to you guys as listening and watching is that if there's something out there that people are trying to make cultural ties to the words of Christ, or trying to make those allusions or make those connections, think a little bit. Like you sharing stuff on social media has a little bit more weight than you think. It feels fast and quick because you're just hitting a share button. That's all you're doing. But think about it a little bit deeper. And those of you who are out there creating that type of stuff, please don't. Just stop. Like, just stop real quick.
And back to the beginning, like Jesus's wound in his side had nothing to do with his mother.
No.
Yeah.
Or a proclamation of motherhood. Like this was,
I mean,
this was to fulfill prophecy.
The artist might have just been a really bad artist. And people now are going, this kind of looks
silly.
like something else.
And I'm assuming it's probably old enough to be, I haven't seen this, but like the time when a lot of those paintings were done was with the Roman Catholic Church was like the thing. And so part of Roman Catholicism is this viewpoint of Mary as to some degree God. And so it makes sense that they always try to bring it back to Mary, which is in essence just another false gospel.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Which hearing that, I think puts the weight so much more on these types of things. And so understand that the gospel is what we said last episode. The gospel is the most important thing in this world. And so we don't ever want to, as believers, water that down or dilute it by the things that we're sharing or posting or having a part in. And instead of elevating your own personal experience to the magnitude of Christ's accomplishments, how about we view our own experience through the lens of Christ's accomplishments and allow that to speak into our own experience? So Yeah, I had a lot of thoughts that day as I was scrolling through the Twitter. Ryan, what are we talking about today, my friend?
Pierce, today we are going to talk about fear.
Ooh.
And we're going to talk about being afraid and living in fear, and how fear ultimately is we talked about this, where Michael, you'd said this about not having control of the situation, or maybe even more than that, wanting control of the situation, wanting to be in control of the situation. But what it boils down to is not trusting God. So we're going to talk
But
about
Ryan, isn't fear just emotion we experience normally as humans?
I think I'm having too much of an influence on you, man.
well, actually, Pierce.
Who's bringing up the dumb questions now?
You drinking Dr. Pepper. I'm
Pierce.
asking
No, right.
questions.
We're just swapping roles.
Why are you influencing Micah so poorly?
He's asking solid questions over here, man.
Well,
I've
actually,
literally never asked a dumb question on this podcast, so I thought, I'm just kidding. I'm just joking.
That's good.
That is my turn.
Yeah.
well, actually, we do think of fear as somewhat normal. I think it's because all of us have been afraid at some point. But what we want to talk about today is first of all, there's a difference between reactionary fear, like the example that I would use is, walking down a trail here in West Texas, nearly stepping on a rattlesnake. I've seen 2 posts from friends of mine in the last 2 days of people talking about rattlesnakes, that one bit their horse, one bit a dog, and just being aware.
Wow.
Yeah, the horse apparently tried to bite the rattlesnake.
Wow.
So the horse got bitten in the head, and the horse looks like a cartoon character because the head is really massive. And it's like,
I heard someone say
is the horse going to be okay?
yeah, the horse will be okay, but it's like,
I heard someone say one time it's better for
it looks
dogs.
like Charlie Brown.
Oh wow! That it's better for dogs to get bit by a rattlesnake in the head than like in the foot.
Really?
I can't forget exactly what they said, but it's something that like they're able to process it better. But
Well, yeah. So
Anyways.
that's a reactionary fear. Somebody jumping out of a closet, and you have kind of a fear response to that. That's completely different than the fear that we want to talk about today. We'll talk about both, but different than the fear we want to talk about, where fear is controlling you or shaping your worldview or shaping what you believe about who God is. And so I think yes, it's normal for people to feel fear. We just need to be really careful about what kind of fear we're allowing into our lives, because ultimately the fear can end up controlling you and you're not submitting yourself to God. And so a couple of examples, there was a mask that my grandmother, I don't know why my grandmother had, but there was this mask that my grandmother had that looked like just an old man. And my mom describes it as an old man's face melting. I think it was just a poorly done mask that looks like an old man with saggy skin or whatever. But apparently it was quite terrifying.
was it creepy?
Yeah. Like so much so that when I was she had it for a long time. Like when I was a newborn, we were living with my grandmother for a little while, and my dad was sitting out on an old tree stump in my grandmother's backyard with this mask on one day, and had like a bottle of booze and stuff, and was like pretending like he was drunk and was coming up towards the house and beating on the door. And the story is that my grandmother left my mother and me. So my mom's like 19 at this point, and I'm a newborn, and left me and my mother in the house. So she goes tearing off down the street, like running away for help.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. But
I thought you were about to say she like went and got the gun and went.
no, she was gone.
Wow.
But when I was a little bit older, probably like 6, 7, something like that, Haley and I would spend the night at my grandmother's sometimes, or maybe not the whole night, but like my parents would go to a movie or a date or whatever, and my grandmother would put us to bed at her house, and then our parents would come and they'd get us. And you might remember this, and your parent loads you out to the car and you're half asleep,
Mm-hmm.
And there were a few times that what my dad would do when he had me in his arms, that he'd be like, "Hey, Ryan, wake up," and he'd be wearing that mask, and I'm in his arms, and he's wearing, and it traumatized me, like terrorized me, And so I had fear of the dark and stuff like that a lot as a kid, and I think that that's a little bit different than what we're talking about, like the fear that really is shaping your decisions and shaping who you are as a person. Can
you give an example of like something you think that would, or an example of what that would look like?
Yeah. So for me, this is, I feel, and this is something that Micah and Pierce have been helping me process through lately. I feel like for all the growth that I've had in 20 plus years, coming through depression 20 years ago, getting to the other side of that, like when I was 25, so more than 20 years ago, I've realized that there's still a lot of fear in my heart. Like Micah, you and I talked before about finances and how how there have been multiple times in our ministries where we're like, okay, I need to take control. I need to, and then God's always provided for us, but we always feel like we've got to do it instead of letting God do it. And I think that maybe that's probably shaped a little differently for you than me. Like you're a problem solver. And so for you, when you're in a tough spot financially, you're thinking from a problem solver's perspective of how can I fix this? I'm usually thinking from a fear perspective. Like I'm not going to make it. How am I going to make it? Even though God's protected me and provided for me hundreds of times. Fear comes in again, and I'm like, but is he going to provide for me this time?
Is that for you? Is that like an emotional thing, like where you feel kind of like a terror or something that's like how would I say it? Like it affects your day to day.
Yeah, for sure. Activities? Like so, if it's prominent, I won't sleep. I'll feel a lot of anxiety. I feel stress. For me, there's a lot of other things that come into it, but part of it, at least, is well, I'll tell you, like, and this is stupid because I think we're a really good team, the three of us, and I think we're really very confident that God has called us to the 456 and that this is where we want to be. But as our church is growing and as you, Micah, are making plans for a building and stuff like that, one of the reasons that I've asked you not to talk to me about it is because I know it'll make me anxious. And so like
anxious about the process or anxious about growing?
So here's, I think the root of it is that even though we three are equally pastors, I am primarily the teaching pastor. And so I feel a great weight of responsibility.
Yeah.
And there's a part of me which I share with you guys because I haven't ever prepared a series that I haven't bounced off of you guys. Like when I'm preaching, I'm representing us.
But it's different because you're carrying the weight of it.
It feels different. It shouldn't feel different because I don't think it should feel different, honestly, because we are a team. I'm not in charge. I'm not the boss. But I feel this weight. And so I worry, what if we get a building and what if we don't grow and what if I fail? And
Okay.
so like there's a part of me that's scared because what if it does grow and what if I fail? And so I have a lot of fear of failure, which ironically keeps me from trying things because it's easier to, you can't fail if you don't try. And so there are a lot of things in my head that I've realized in just the last couple of months talking to you guys that I still carry a lot of fear, probably shaped in me by my childhood and to a large degree. But I am recognizing that it is keeping me from having the kind of relationships with people I need to have, and it is keeping me from trusting God the way I need to trust God. And so what I'm hoping for the people who are listening today is that maybe they can get to this quicker than I did. But I'm realizing now that my fear is keeping me from being the kind of parent I want to be, the kind of husband I want to be, the kind of follower of Christ that I want to be. Like it is stifling me somehow, and it's ultimately because I'm not trusting that God is who He says He is.
It seems like that. I mean, I'm sure we could share other examples too, but I feel like in the times we've talked before about like fear in life and the way that you're talking about, it seems like the core of it comes from not trusting God or feeling like you're out of control.
Yeah.
If we're just using a practical example of like rattlesnakes, you feel like you're not in control. I almost drowned in a pool when I was real little. And when I say almost drowned, like my perspective was that I was drowning. I was,
That's your only weakness.
That's it.
Water.
That's it. Water.
True.
Water. Man, that would suck.
Yes.
That would suck. I can't kayak fish anymore. I can't go on the boat. Can't go to the beach. Can't go fly fishing in the mountains. Man,
Yeah, you'd be dead.
Ugh, it'd be awful. Anyways, but like from my perspective, I was drowning. I was like, I couldn't swim, and the pool I was in was an indoor pool at some family's house, and it had one of those real steep, like down to the deep end from the shallow end, and I got a little too far and started sliding down it, and I couldn't swim. So I remember like pushing up off the bottom, getting to the top, taking a breath, and going out and like yelling as I'm coming to the top. And I just remember bobbing up and down until someone came and pulled me out. So
that was actually pretty smart of you. to Bob to jump up off the bottom.
It was just instinctive, but in my mind, it felt like I was out of control.
Yeah, for sure.
I was out of
you
control.
Couldn't change your situation,
right? And I wasn't. And so, like, I don't remember this, but I'm sure for a while I didn't want to get back in the pool.
Right.
And so that's what I mean. Is like even on a practical level, it's the lack of control that seems to drive this feeling of fear.
Yep.
And I think you could apply that the same way. Like when we have fears in life that are more like not what did you say earlier, reactionary.
Yeah.
The likelihood seems to be that it is a area of our life that we haven't actually like said, I trust God in this area.
Yeah.
Like I'm imagining that's probably like you working through stuff with depression in your past. It's recognizing maybe areas in your life where you don't actually trust God in those areas, that there's been growth, but you still haven't like said, God, I trust you completely in this. Cause it seems, it's funny we say it this way, it seems scary. I'm guessing that's what it is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Psalm 27:1 says, "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid?" And I think that when we really rest in the fact that Christ is our salvation, when we really rest that He is our stronghold, like the name of the Lord is a strong tower, the righteous run into it and are safe. You know, like there is safety in Christ, even if it means it costs you everything. If it costs you your life, if it costs you your family, if it costs you, and here's what's really interesting. A number of years ago, I was having some really bad pain in my stomach, and they didn't know what it was. They ran a couple of tests, couldn't figure out what it was. They asked about a family history, and can I just moral of the story really quickly here is make sure you know your family history because it would have saved me a lot of tests. And so they asked me about gallbladder stuff, and I didn't know anything. So I was like, no, I don't know any. And so they're like, well, we think you might have stomach cancer.
Oh.
And so I got a colonoscopy and an endoscopy, and they ran some other tests because of the kind of pain that I was having and the stomach issues that I was having. They thought that I might have stomach cancer or colon cancer or something like that. And the 3 days that it took to get those tests run and get the results, like I wasn't scared. I was like, okay, I believe that God has numbered my days, and I believe that God, I'm not going to die before my time. Well, we've talked about that, but you know what I mean? Like God is not aware of my impending death. He's not unaware of it.
He's not aware of it.
What did I say? Aware? Yeah. Sorry. God is not unaware of when I'm going to.
Oh no, Ryan's got cancer.
Where's Ryan? Oh, he died.
Like there wasn't any fear about it. And yet, what I've learned is that most of my fear has to do with how people perceive me. And most of my fear has to do with my ability to accomplish whatever my work or task is well. Like I'm fearful that I won't be able to do it well. So like it's all self-motivated.
Yeah.
The point of that being that I am not thinking about my work in front of me as something God has entrusted to me. I'm thinking about my work in front of me as something I have to do well in so that I can continue to be worth something or fun. Anyway, I'm seeking to find value.
It's pride?
Yeah, it's totally pride. I'm seeking to find value in these things other than finding my value in Christ. And because I can't control things all the time, now I'm fearful.
Yeah.
And so it just, I'm learning that there are a lot of areas. I'm very rarely optimistic. I am excited about what the other side of this journey will look like. One of the things I know for sure is I'll sleep better. That'll be super nice. But I'm excited about the other end of this journey. I'm excited about what happens on the other side of this.
Yeah, I think with the aspect of understanding fully, we say this every episode, keep Christ as core. What could be simpler than that? Right there. Look at that. KCAC, look at that shirt Ryan's showing off. When we come at it from an understanding of we are secure in Christ while life is happening, kind of what you brought up with the cancer example of like the potential of having cancer, like reactionary fear could be happening in the midst of that. But if you're viewing this life, what kind of I said to the PCC, through the lens of Christ and his accomplishments, then what's the worst that could happen in cancer? Quote unquote, the worst, you could die.
Right.
But your life is now hidden with Christ and God. Like your earthly death doesn't mean anything in regards to eternity. Like you're with Christ. And so, yeah, of course there's getting your affairs in order and getting things like that. Sure. But in that same place, there is comfort and stability. Kind of what we said last episode with that Winnie the Pooh example of having someone next to you.
Sure.
With Christ, with an understanding of knowing that Christ is always with us. He will never forsake us and nothing can snatch us from his hand. May it be cancer or a rattlesnake or whatever the example may be. And even way deeper examples such as insecurity or how you've been shaped by a poor childhood or something like that. If you know Jesus and have your faith placed in Jesus, none of that can snatch you from his hand. He is always present. And so in regards to fear and acknowledging that you don't have control and that in itself is scary, acknowledging that my stability rests in Christ and it never has been in my control. Right. And so like that can, at least in the way my mind works, that helps relinquish that control of like, I was never in control to begin with. And even as I came to Jesus, I said, when I was in control, I sucked at it. Like I would rather you be in Jesus.
Do you feel like you have
fear
or like there's certain fears in your life that
I'm racking my brain and I don't know. I'm that's not to toot my own horn by any means. I'm just, I know, but I think that there's, there might be, maybe there's moments, I guess I've noticed in like, I would never use the word fear to describe it. But what I was going to say is I've noticed in marriage and being a parent, ish that, there are moments where I'm like, I know that I'm serving you from the perspective of Christ, but I'm not seeing like the immediate fruit of that. And so I guess there might be fear that I'm not actually serving them with the mindset of Christ. So it kind of makes me question in that moment.
I got you.
But I don't know. I would never say it as a fear. Like I would never use that word. I guess you could in a sense, like I'm worried that I'm not doing it properly or to my full extent, loving them well in those moments. And it's making me kind of check the moments, but I don't know if fear would ever, it doesn't keep me up at night. Like I think the stability is still in Christ. And it's not something that I wrestle with.
You know, one of the things that I think is the biggest condemnation to me in all this is Isaiah 26:3 says, you will keep him in perfect peace whose mind is on you because he trusts in you.
Yeah.
And so I think that without stretching it too much, we could argue that peace and fear are at least at odds with one another, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so like one of the things that may indicate, one of the things I think controlling fear indicates is that our mind is not on God.
Mm-hmm.
So you keep him in perfect peace whose mind is on you because he trusts in you. And so like that's a good resource for me. That might not work for everybody, but that's a good resource for me because now what I can do in that moment is I can go, okay, if you're fearful right now, it means your mind isn't on God.
Yeah.
Your mind isn't on who Christ is and what he's done. Your mind is on circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
Please.
I think you saying that kind of bred some clarity into, I think, why I might have those initial feelings of, am I loving them right? I think it goes back to my dad. I think one of my fears for a long time before Christ shaped me out of it was, I don't want to be my dad. Because the way that it looked to me was that my dad was a solid Christian that then all of a sudden pursued sin, pursued the world, pursued these things and abandoned everything.
Sure.
And so I think that there was this fear that like, that's possible, if that makes sense. And so I think Christ shaped my perspective of like, no, you're secure in me. It's not like that was going on for a long time with him. Like this wasn't just like an out of the blue type of thing. I'm going to do this now. Like it was something that he, to use his own words, was struggling with for a long time. But I mean, we would say that he was never truly a believer.
Right.
And so
based off of 1 John 2.
Exactly,
Yeah, that those who depart from Christ were never with him.
And I don't know where he ended up when he died. It's a whole nother discussion. But all that to say, I think that might be where that slight worry may be now, maybe flecks of what Christ destroyed in me.
That makes total
years
sense,
ago.
I feel like probably we would say, most people would say at least, that their fear has to do with some experience from the past. Like I'll give you an example of one for me is it's a bunch of almosts in my life, I guess, which is I almost fell into a Shark Tank at like SeaWorld. I don't know what it was. It was like SeaWorld or one of the, I feel like it was in California, so probably wasn't SeaWorld. But like they had the
SeaWorld San Diego.
Yeah, that's the big one.
That's the big one.
So they had a Shark Tank and they had like this
and you thought
viewing area.
Ace Ventura Pet Detective.
Yes,
where he falls
exactly.
in.
Yeah, even though
he just wanted to meet Mark
Even though
Cuban.
this happened before that.
Yeah.
But I remember like leaning over to look and like falling forward, my dad grabbing me and pulling me back. Well, for whatever reason in that moment, like I had this fear of sharks all of a sudden.
Yeah.
And I don't really have a fear. Like, it's not like I'm not freaked out by sharks. I still get in the ocean. But when I was in college, a bunch of us friends in college, I went on a cruise. And one day we took one of those excursions where we took a sailboat out to a reef to snorkel.
Cool.
Well, they parked the sailboat, I don't know, 200 yards away from the reef. And so there's this wide open area of ocean you got to swim to get to the reef. Well, I was like, I don't remember what happened. I got sick on the sailboat, like motion sick. I didn't know that it was going to mess me up that bad. I was like sick. So I swam out to the reef with everybody after I was sick, but just didn't feel good. So I was going to swim back to the boat. Like go back to the boat by myself. Oh, yeah. And I'm swimming through this section of like, I'm guessing like it may have been 50 feet, but it felt like 200 yards.
Yeah.
And I'm swimming by myself in the ocean, and I look around, I look down and look to my left and right and front and back, and there's nothing but ocean. Like I'm under the water with my goggles looking, and there's nothing. And I've never in my life felt so small and insecure before. Right. And I'm swimming and I'm literally freaking out. Like, is there a shark coming to get me? I'm not really that, like, I get in the ocean now, fine. Like I've even been around sharks now, and it's fine. But like that, for whatever reason, that moment, based on probably my experience as a kid, caused me to feel this fear. So I think that's probably the case, is that we have some kind of experience from the past, whether it's major or not, that influences us in a way where here's what I think. I think that if in that moment, my guess is, as I'm swimming, if I'd started going, man, God, look how beautiful this ocean is, and put my mind on the Lord, I think that fear probably would have gone away.
Even if a shark had eaten you,
even if a shark just came up and just
I went scuba diving in the Philippines one time, and it's so funny because it was so opposite. Like I'm down, I don't know, we were like 30 feet, not super deep, but like we're feeding the fish because that's what they want you to do, is like experience all this. Right. So we're like, wait, this bread, and we hold this bread up and it's crumbling and there's fish coming from all over the place. And the guy that was guiding us was like, there will be sharks that come up sometimes. Just don't freak out. Like, they're not going to do anything. Yeah. And there wasn't a moment where I was down there with the bread going, oh my gosh, there's a shark. And I think it's because
different mindset,
different perspective.
Well, to your point, my kids have never had nightmares about, something under their bed. They've never been afraid of a monster under their bed. They've never been afraid of monsters in their closet, stuff like that.
So what if I found that mask your dad had and snuck under your bed one night and came out?
Yeah, that would mess with me. But, well, I mean, I will tell you that, like,
I would probably die because you probably have a pistol right there. You probably just shoot.
My cousins, Elizabeth and Rachel, and my sister Haley and I, we were all playing. We were all, if I was guessing, like 10 to 11 years old, 10 to 12 years old. And we were playing, we were all there for Christmas or Thanksgiving or something at my grandmother's house, the whole family. And we're playing in this back room, this kid's room that we would always play in. And we didn't realize that it had gotten dark outside. And 2 whole walls of this bedroom are windows. And I don't know how long we'd been playing, but one of us looks up and there's just a person, an old man, standing at the window. And we just ran down the hall, screaming all the way back out to the kitchen. And of course, it was my dad in the mask, but I had a lot of fear of the
old
dark.
men.
Yeah. I had a lot of fear of the dark, and I had a lot of fear of just, but there were things like that shaped those things for me. And, I'm really convinced, in most cases, I don't want to make an absolute here, Pierce, because I know how much you hate absolutes.
Yeah, I'll absolutely fire you. Yeah.
But I think a great deal, even of what we know and believe about Christ, I think a great deal of our behavior and our ability to act a certain way comes from what we think. Our thinking shapes our actions. And so, for me to be 47 and to know what I know about God, and to still, I don't want to say that I'm ruled in by fear, but for me to have it cripple me so many days a year, like even if it's a day a month, 2 days, 3 days a month, sometimes, like, and I just, I'm at the point now where I don't want to be like, well, that's just an acceptable amount of fear. You know, I don't want to be there. Like I want to come deeper into a relationship with Christ where I'm trusting him more fully, and not allowing things in my childhood to influence my thought more than Christ does.
Yeah. It seems like it's a risk factor, right? Like that's what we were doing. Like it's us calculating the risk. And if we feel like we can't control it, then we feel this out of control sense we could call fear. That's what it seems like. You are fearful of something you can't control. And I think that's an acknowledgement of our maybe points in life when we are not relying on God in that thing. I'm fearful of this because I don't actually trust God. And I would say, Ryan, you've expressed this before. Sometimes it comes from your lack of understanding of how something happens. So like you've even said before, you don't want to know like about the building we might build or that we're going to build. Like you don't want to know necessarily the details of it because for you, part of your personality is that you function best when you understand like the structure.
I will try to figure it out.
Right.
And because I can't, it'll frustrate me and it'll make me anxious because I don't know how it's going to work.
Right.
And I know that you know how it's going to work.
Right. I was going to say that the difference is like,
and so
the difference is like,
you go for it.
Is like you saying, I trust you because you're doing it. If you feel anxiety or fear, then that's actually saying, you might tell me, I trust you, but what you're actually acknowledging in that moment is that you don't.
Yeah. And so it's easier for me in something like that because the reality is I don't have any interest in learning all the stuff that you already know. I don't. It's not, there are a lot of other things that I want to do that I don't feel like I'm doing well enough right now, but I will try to figure it out. If I start to get included in the conversation. Now it's one thing for you to come to me and go, hey, do you care what the stage looks like this? Or do you like those kinds of things I think are interesting, but I don't want to know the finances.
And we wouldn't even say like, it's you're not even acknowledging like you feel like it'd be wrong for you to try to figure that out or have interest in it.
No.
What you're acknowledging is that there's something in you that causes anxiety when you don't understand exactly how it's going to work.
Yeah.
And so the easiest way for you to avoid that anxiety is to not try to be involved in it. And to just trust the person, whoever's doing it.
Yeah,
and I think you could apply that to like a lot of life situations in general.
Those are details that you and like Darren are more attuned to, and I don't have to be.
In Colorado, a few years ago in the summer, had my friend Rex Stevenson with me. We were going fishing, and there was this pretty remote location we were going to, and to get to the spot, you had to drive up. We were already in the mountains. We had to drive up farther into the mountains, and there was the road we were on didn't have any like rails on it, and one side of the road, the drop off was no joke, like 400-foot cliff.
Golly.
And so the entire time I'm driving, because I get motion sick, so I'm driving, and I drive in the mountains a lot. I say a lot, a few times a year. Rex doesn't talk like the whole trip. And I look over and he's just got his hand like gripped as tight as he could on the door and the O-poop handle.
Yeah.
Because he's out of control. He sees the potential of what could happen. He's not driving. He doesn't feel in control. I don't feel any fear whatsoever or anxiety because I'm driving and I'm comfortable on those roads. It actually wasn't even the first time I've been on that road either. But he's experiencing that feeling of anxiety or fear because he's out of control. And even if he had said, I'm comfortable with you driving, he's acknowledging in that moment, he's not actually comfortable with me driving.
Yeah. And it's one of those things that like what we have to recognize as Christians is that really God is in control and that he is the authority and we can trust him.
Yeah. Maybe that's what I meant earlier by the risk. Like and this might just be a personality thing, but if you said this earlier, Pierce, if like the worst thing that could happen is death, then what is it that we're really risking?
Exactly.
Like what are we risking by trusting God in things that we're uncomfortable with?
Yeah.
We're really risking nothing. We're risking our own pride. That's it. Yeah. We're risking us being made fun of or feeling inadequate or small. That's the only risk is something that is a pride issue where really there's nothing to risk to say, I'm going to trust God in every aspect of my life.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Please, no, you're fine.
I think a way to begin, I was thinking like, what does that look like for somebody who hasn't necessarily began to see shaping in that mindset. I think a practical way to begin is acknowledging your lack of control in its entirety.
Right.
So we tend to, in moments of fear, in moments of distress, or in moments of being uncomfortable, that's when we bring up the like, oh, that's when we really look deep into ourselves. But in the moments of quote unquote control, but there's no need to doubt.
Yeah.
And
Right.
so for instance, like our American perspective on finances, like
Right.
when the finances are good and things are going well, it's because you have control over it. And then when things get bad, that's when you've lost control. It's when things are fearful. And then you try to either gain control. And it's usually those moments that you begin to think, oh yeah, I never really had control. But then
Right.
things get up again, and then we kind of swerve back into this mindset of like, oh, I've got control again. I've maintained it
Okay,
again.
so here's a thought. What if, so like finances for me makes sense because I think this is one area that I have, I don't know if I feel fear in finances. Like you expressed it earlier
or at
when
least not what we would culturally call fear. Yeah.
Yes, but it's still me not trusting God in it.
Yeah.
So
you might
what
even
if,
call it worry or anxiety,
Sure.
like Matthew 6 does.
Yeah.
Don't worry about tomorrow.
Absolutely.
Don't worry about your
absolutely
food or
anxious
clothing.
for sure.
Yeah.
So here's a thought.
I think that they're probably cousins. Fear
Yeah.
and anxiety.
in finances,
Fear's the clown with the sharp teeth.
the old man,
yeah.
the old man mask. I think that we would say like it. Let's say for example, I'm anxious about my finances because I bought a whole bunch of things I shouldn't buy on a bunch of bad credit.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
Right.
I can't in that moment go, well, what I mean, I say in that moment, I trust you, God, period. But I can't in that moment go, God, rescue me from this. You can say it. And
Yeah.
He might. I'm just, so
Yeah.
here's a
you
thought.
put
Like,
yourself in that situation.
what if
yeah.
we say, God, I trust you to avoid fear. I trust you in everything.
Mhm.
Help me make wise decisions.
Yeah.
Because I think there's a lot of times we actually feel out of control because we've made stupid decisions.
Yes.
Mhm.
And that's, I don't think that's, I think maybe like going back even farther before the fear, making those bad decisions is something we would say is ultimately not trusting God. We talked at the conference about finances that the idea of being smart or wise with our resources, with our finances or money is basically being content with what we have.
Right.
Yeah.
That's part of trusting God is being content with what we have. That doesn't mean you like say, you know, like, oh, I have 2 pairs of underwear, I'm good. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is like a heart that says I'm content in God and God alone. And in the midst of that contentment, sure, you can buy things, but what you probably won't find yourself doing is overexerting, like spending more than you have, making bad financial decisions.
Yeah.
I'll say it this way. What I mean is I don't think you make bad financial decisions because you're content.
Right.
I think you make bad financial decisions because you're discontent with
I
something
gotcha.
and you want
Yeah,
something
yeah.
else. So like maybe say, trust God and be wise.
Mhm.
Right.
Like trust God. God, I trust you with my finances. So it's not like you willy-nilly say, so I'm not going to work anymore. I'm just going to like
Yeah.
trust that you're going to provide food like manna in the wilderness.
Yeah.
But it's God, I trust that you're going to guide me through life. I trust that you're ultimately in control, even if I make some decisions that aren't the best. Help me walk through that. But just say like, God, I want to be wise so that I'm not putting myself in a position where I have the temptation to distrust you in life. And I wonder how much we could apply that principle. God, I trust you. Help me make wise decisions to life to keep us from fear. So like,
Yeah.
I think the only thing I'm really scared of is dancing in front of a large group of people. And I said, when I say scared, I don't really mean like I'm freaking out. It's just like if you were gonna pick one, like if I, no, that's not true.
What's the recurring dream
That's
you
not
have?
true. I have this recurring dream where
I wish I could dance.
where I gotta poop real bad, and the only toilet that's available is like in the middle of this giant group of people, no stall. Like it's like over and over again. This is like the one. No, you're right. Ultimate fear is like having to take a dump in front of tons of people. You know what's funny about that?
We'll get you over that fear. That's our Simpler conference next,
Next
year.
year, yeah. Micah just walks in, all the chairs are cleared out, just one toilet in the middle.
Simpler conference 2023.
That's right.
Watch,
there is
watch
something-
Micah poop openly.
I don't know if I had like a traumatic experience or what, but like
With bathrooms.
it's a recurring dream, and I wake up and I'm like stressed.
That's so
Yeah.
funny.
So okay, then maybe that's one thing, but like ridiculous stuff like that aside, I think that maybe that's an acknowledgement. Like, what if someone that struggles with the fears in life literally just got on their face before God and said, "God, teach me to trust you in everything and help me make wise decisions."
Yeah. Well, and okay, so wise decisions, finances, that kind of thing. if you're in the stock market or crypto or any kind of investments this year, it has been brutal, right? And so Michelle and I weren't even in a position where we could even start investing until about a decade ago. And we started investing, and we've tried to be really wise with our investments. I feel like we have been, and not putting our confidence in that, but this is the system we live in, and we want to be in a position to help our kids as much as we can. But also, I don't think I'm going to paint and preach till I drop dead. I'll probably do those things to some degree, but not to the degree I'm doing them now. And so trying to be wise with that, right? And so we've lost so much money this year that there's a little part of me, and I'm also working really hard this year at my art, and we're at a place now where the church can finally pay us, which has been a blessing for the last 2 years or year and a half. And like, I'm doing everything. I am making those wise choices, and I am, but I find that I still have anxiety. And so let's pretend that you haven't been careless and you haven't put yourself in a precarious situation. If you're doing everything that God's putting in front of you to do, and you're working as though you're working for the Lord and not for men, and you're seeking to honor God in all the things that you have, and things get a little bit tense and you get fearful, and I'm speaking from experience here, so just hear me out on this before you get defensive. If things get a little tense and then you get fearful, what that means is your security wasn't in God to begin with. Your security was in the decisions you were making.
Yep.
And so
which is a not trusting God.
Yeah, it means you're not trusting God.
Yeah.
Which mean, because if you're you alluded to this, or you may have said it, Pierce, but at least the thought that I had after you said something a minute ago was, if you're only trusting in God when things go well, you're not actually trusting in God.
Yeah, that's more of the direction I was going with it. Yeah, for sure. That if when things are quote unquote good or stable, whatever you want to say, and you're viewing it from the perspective of I've got control over it, which a lot of times we don't realize we were viewing it from that perspective until things go wrong.
Yeah.
Like, but I had control. And then you're like, that's the problem. Ooh. So maybe that to challenge the people listening, the people over there listening and watching, to challenge them, I think there may be an area in your life where it doesn't need to be questioned, but I would encourage you to question, is that because you feel like you have control, or because you've trusted God in the situation and are longing to be wise within that situation with what God has given you? Well, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So here's some interesting thoughts from the Old Testament is over and over and over again. And I could cite a couple of examples for you, but God warns the people in Deuteronomy before they go into the promised land. He says, now when you go into this promised land and you receive vineyards that you didn't labor for, and fields that you didn't labor for, and flocks that you didn't labor for, be careful that you don't become content and then turn away from me. And they do. They become content, and then they turn away from God. King Rehoboam seeks God for 3 years, and then once the kingdom is firmly established in his hands, he turns away from God. And we see this pattern repeated over and over and over again in the Old Testament. And even with the manna, God tells the people in Exodus 16, I'm going to give you your daily allowance. You don't gather more than you need for the day. And the people would gather more than they needed for the day because they didn't trust God. And what we see over and over and over again is that these people appeared to trust God while he was providing for them. And then the moment that those resources appeared not to be there, or they were content in their resources, they were done with God, meaning that their confidence was never really in God. It was just like, let me get what I can get out of this. They weren't trusting God. And then they would immediately fall into this turmoil, this terrible position. And I wonder how much, like Micah, you have said this before, and it's the only case that I remember you've ever said this, but like when Hayes was born and he was sick and had health issues, one of your first thoughts was, what did I do wrong? Like, why is God doing this to me? And even if you can't point to another instance in your life, that is an instance where even if it was only a moment.
I can't think of one, which is why it was so shocking, right. I think.
But in that moment, you're thinking, what did I do wrong? There's some fear, anxiety, worry,
100%.
All this stuff. And it's crazy.
Because I couldn't fix it.
It's because you didn't. And you're a fixer.
Yeah.
And so how many of us are relying on our resources, relying on what we have, calling it a reliance on God until we don't have those things anymore. And then when we're destitute, the curtain's pulled back and we are revealed to be nothing more than an imposter, that we don't really trust God. And so if you're listening today and you're like, man, I don't really have any fear, but Ryan, sometimes I have sleepless nights, and sometimes here's my encouragement to you. It's a little bit of a challenge, I guess, to you is I'm 47 and I am at the place in my life where I am just going, you know what? I'm not okay with this anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Even if it's 10% of my year, like why am I spending 36 days a year anxious and fearful and not sleeping? What is that really saying about what I believe about God? And I'm just not okay with it anymore.
Yeah.
I believe that God is bigger than my fear. I believe that he's bigger than my worry.
He's bigger than your past. He's bigger than your experiences. He's bigger than the hurt that's come from the past. I think that's maybe it. Like, I feel like that's the same thing. Like your past experiences and hurt affecting your trust in God is the same thing as someone like me not trusting God because we feel like we were able to deal with it on our own.
Yep.
Control. I feel like it's the same issue on both sides. It's just two different reactions.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. It's just, I don't know. One of the things that I'm thinking through a lot the last couple of months, and you'll probably hear me say again, even on the podcast or at church on Sundays or whatever, is I don't want to be content with what I have already received from Christ. This is not a great paraphrase, but I'm kind of thinking of the end of Philippians 3, where he says, not that I've already obtained all this, not that I've already received all this, but the one thing that I do, pressing on forward for the upward call of God in Christ Jesus, forgetting everything that lies behind and straining for what lies ahead. I do not consider that I have already taken hold of it, and he said, but I want to walk according to that which I've already received. And so I have received a portion of God's grace. And instead of going, that's enough, what I want to do is press deeper and go, I want more. I want to, and so that's where I'm at in terms of fear and trying to navigate that and being honest with it. This is something I haven't decided quite yet how to do, but I've been feeling the need to talk to my boys about kind of what I'm going through mentally without shaking their foundation, but hopefully in an effort to shape their foundation. Yeah. And I haven't figured out a good way to go about that yet, where it's, because I don't feel like it needs to be an hour-long conversation, but they're included in the conversation, so that maybe they can, in their youth, learn from me and be people who trust God more completely than I did in, at an earlier place in their life.
Yeah, for sure. I think that also, go ahead. Oh, sorry. Talking over here. For sure. I think that also speaks wonders into the broadening what you're saying in regards to being a parent, also speaking into us in community. There is a lot to be said of the victory of Christ and the development that you're walking through. I think that there's too often a perspective of you walk into a church and you immediately judge people based off of either how they're behaving or what they're doing. And I think there's too often or what they're wearing. Yeah. And you usually the thing you hear a lot is, well, that person has it all together. And they're basing how they're interacting with that person off of, they have it all together. So I'm not going to bother them with this, or I don't need to invite them to this. I'm not going to do that, whatever. Instead of viewing people through that lens, we can also, if you're somebody who maybe has gone through something in regards to this, what you're saying is you're longing for the other side, and there will be another side. And so the perspective from the other side, from other people, may say, well,
Adele's already there.
Exactly. He's got it all together. That was a good joke. he's got it all together now that he's on the other side of it. But you have a journey that God took you through to talk about. And so I think that there's what song is that?
No, not who is it that's living on a prayer? It's not Jack and
It's Bon Jovi.
I know, but in the song.
Oh, we'll figure it out.
Yeah.
That'll be next week's episode. That's the cliffhanger. That's the cliffhanger. There's I feel like the more that we can point to God and testify of how he is shaping us and molding us from a truth-based, Christ-based perspective, proclaiming the freedom that we have from fear. I don't know. what's the word I'm looking for here? I was going to say it brings more reality to it, but that doesn't make it necessarily more real. I just think there's more, it invites more freedom, I guess is the way to say it. Like in our conversations as a community, it invites that freedom to say, well, I'm struggling through this and God is taking me through it, but it's a journey. Like I didn't wake up this morning and it's gone, but I'm trusting the Lord today. And you're able to talk about that without being fearful, and you're able to grow alongside each other.
That's a good way to say it. A lot of people don't want to talk about it because they're just fearful of the conversation.
Mm-hmm. It goes back to control as well. Yeah, they don't have control over the conversation or control over what people think about them, and so exactly.
Really the encouragement here is like this is a journey. Maybe for you, this is a journey towards coming to a place where you trust God entirely with your life. Understanding that this isn't just a shift of your perspective. You can have the perspective that I need to trust God. In every aspect of my life, but understanding that it might be, for some of you, it might be like an overnight change. For some of you, it might be a journey.
Sure.
Yeah.
And so acknowledging that the journey needs to happen means removing the anxiety of actually opening up in the conversation with other people.
For sure.
You definitely aren't meant to do this alone. That's one of the things we say a lot is that like Christianity was never meant to be a solo sport. Like it's a team effort.
And maybe this is what you're trying to say, Pierce. Like you may view other people as them having it all together. And that might be why you don't want to have a conversation with them, is because you feel like they're going to look down on you as something that's less.
Yeah, exactly.
And if we don't have the conversation, there is no growth. There is no journey towards trusting God with every aspect of our life if we don't start the conversation.
Well,
exactly.
And can you imagine, I mean, just how many marriages would be protected and how many people emotionally would be protected if everybody was just a little more honest about where they were and how God was growing them and shaping them. Like, I think you're right. I think we hide these things because we're embarrassed, we're ashamed, we're whatever.
It's a control issue.
Yeah. And what we're doing at the end of the day is we're actually setting up people for failure, including ourselves. So whether you're Tommy or Gina.
Is that who it is?
Yeah. Whether you're Tommy or Gina and you're halfway there.
Yeah.
Right. Or you're Adele and you're already on the other side. Who's just getting started?
Hello.
Well, Pink sang the song about the party just getting started, so we can do that. Yeah. So Pink, she's the beginning of her journey. You got people that are halfway through, people that are on their side.
Yeah. So, yeah, I'm somewhere. I'm Tommy and Gina.
Yeah.
And I used to work on the docks.
Yeah. You used to work on the docks.
Yeah.
Who was that? Is it Jimmy Eat World?
Oh yeah.
What's that one?
That's Jimmy Eat World. Yeah, the middle. Just take some time. Well, I copyright. Look at that.
Whoops.
Little girl. I had to finish it. Yeah. So.
Little girl. Oh wait.
That's good. Steven's here.
Got it.
We're at The Garden Audio. Go check out The Garden Audio on Instagram. Give them a follow. While you're there, go follow @SimplerPod. That's going to be a great way to communicate with us, interact with us. Let us know your thoughts on the episode, or you can leave comments on YouTube if you haven't subscribed there yet. It's youtube.com/SimplerPod. Our website, for those of you who don't know, is the456.org/SimplerPod. That'll get you to everything that we're connected to. So that's the core.
And the 456 there are the numbers.
Exactly. All of these links that I've mentioned are all in the show notes. So go check those out. Go give us a follow. Give us a like. Tell us your thoughts. Tell us what we should talk about. And as always, keep Christ as core. What could be simpler than that? We'll catch you guys next week.
Nice.
Bye.